All right, today we're talking about the importance of building networks professionally and surrounding yourself with successful people. My guest today is Charlie Garcia. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corkin here. I am the host of this show, and you know that every week I talk to fascinating CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. And, you know, if you check out the archives, we've got Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, so many great episodes. Check out that in the archives. And before we get into this interview, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run your podcast and content marketing. We are the easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do three things: strategy, accountability, and full execution. And Charlie, I know from doing my background, my research on you, that you appreciate the value of relationships with the right people, just like I do. And for me, doing a podcast has been the privilege of my life because I get to meet amazing people like yourself and so many others. And what I love about what we do at our company is that we're like the team of magic elves behind the scenes that make it look easy for a company and a host that they can create amazing content and amazing relationships, and most importantly, run their business. So if you have any questions about podcasting, go to rise25.com or email us at support@rise25.com. And before I get to today's guest, I want to give a shout out to one of my past guests on the show, Sean McGinnis, who is currently global member development at Tiger 21. A great guy, great guest on the show. I imagine you, Charlie, crossed paths with him at YPO in the past. And my guest, of course, is Charlie Garcia, is the managing partner at R360. He's a decorated military veteran, having served in the United States Air Force. Thank you, sir, for your service. He's advised 6 U.S. presidential administrations from both parties, and in the business world founded Sterling Financial Investment Group, which he grew to 60 or so offices. We're going to talk about that in a moment. He's also served on a number of different boards, and in 2020 he established R360, which is an invite-only organization for ultra high net worth individuals. So we're going to talk about that as well. Charlie, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. I've been so excited about this interview, and I always love to get to know my guests and a little bit what they were like as a kid. And you actually grew up partly in Panama. Your father was Panamanian and went to Catholic school. Tell me a little bit about that unique upbringing, because I don't even sense a hint of an accent at you. You must have been going to like international schools and things like that when you're growing up.
Thank you, John. Thank you for having me. And interesting, I know Sean very well, and I was in Tiger 21 8 years, so we have crossed paths before. He's a great guy. So I did have an accent, a pretty thick accent, when I first went to the Air Force Academy. I had, blonde hair and bluish eyes, and they'd say, "Where are you from? Are you from the South?" And I said, "Yeah, south of the border."
Very south.
But because I had this kind of funny accent and I didn't look like I was Hispanic, they put an O in front of my name in the military, and they called me O Garcia instead of Garcia. But I lived in Panama 20 years, and that's where I grew up. And I did go to Catholic school. So back in my day, and especially in Latin America, when you got caught doing bad things and you had nuns, they took out the ruler and did their
My
thing.
father went to Catholic schools. I heard the stories.
Yes. So, and I was also an altar boy. There was a church about a block away. And on Saturdays, the nuns would come in and make the host. And it was like this pancake thing, and you would close it, and then they would take the host and put it somewhere special, and the scraps would be thrown away. Well, I would then take that bag where all the scraps were thrown away, and I would come when it got dark, no one was around, and I would take those scraps and put them into little baggies, and I'd take them to school, sell them for a nickel.
Yeah.
And I did really well for about 3 weeks until I got caught. And my father's a doctor, my mother's a 7th grade science teacher, and they both get called in by Sister Mary Celeste. And I got suspended. And needless to say, there was punishment from all sides. I didn't stop my entrepreneurial ventures. I just figured out something to do that wasn't, you would think I was selling drugs on campus. It was only like host, but the
Right.
scraps. But
Right.
it might as well have been a sin.
That's funny. That's funny because you seem like a very straight-laced guy. I mean, you end up, becoming a White House fellow. You go to the U.S. Air Force Academy. You had a unique vantage point as a White House fellow. You were there, I believe, 88 to 89. You've got this great picture of you with President Reagan, but that was during the election transitioning into the next administration, President Bush, first President Bush. What was it like having that experience? And for those who don't know what a White House fellow is, talk a little bit about what you guys did.
Sure, and I wrote a book, and the only book that exists about the White House fellowships in 08, 09. It was set up by Lyndon Johnson wanted to figure out how, if you look at the founding fathers, 14, 15 people, why can't we have that type of individual that we can find out in America mid-career in their mid-30s, bring them to Washington to work for the president, vice president, or a cabinet official for a year, attend all the meetings, have your office right next to theirs, and then maybe 20 years later, you would get inspired to come to Washington or take a cabinet position, learn how Washington works the media, the Congress, the judicial, the Supreme Court, the executive branch. And so it was just an incredible, first you got to get selected. About 5,000 people apply, 14, 15 get selected. I got selected at the age of 27, so I was the youngest White House fellow selected at the time. And I love education. My mother was a teacher, and I actually got hired by Bill Bennett. He was the Secretary of Education. But then what happened was in the summer, he decided to leave and he started a consulting firm with Jack Kemp and Gene Kirkpatrick. So now I didn't want to work at education if it wasn't for Bennett. So I wanted to work somewhere else. Someone was already at the State Department with George Shultz, and the deputy secretary really wanted a White House fellow. And they gave me permission to work for him, even though he wasn't the cabinet secretary. And working for him and him then becoming a mentor changed my life because that guy was John Whitehead. John Whitehead had been in the Navy. He went to a small firm in the 50s called Goldman Sachs, and he rises to become the chairman of Goldman Sachs. He retires as chairman, and Schultz had convinced him and Reagan, hey, the State Department's a mess. We could use someone with your skills to come in and help us out. So I ended up with an office right next to him, and I'm working for like John Whitehead, who's such an amazing leader. And but 6 months later, he left, and Bush comes in and says he's going to declare a war on drugs. And who does he bring in? Bill
William
Bennett.
Bennett.
So I became Bill Bennett's like third hire. It's like, oh, you again.
Wow.
And
That was
when
a
I
very
went,
high profile assignment at the time. At the time, that was a big campaign promise.
it was a big deal. The military was totally against it. They saw this kind of as another Vietnam. But I remember when I interviewed with Bennett, I walked in, I was so prepared, and he said to me, "Do you have good hands?" What? What? We have a flag football team. I'm looking for someone that can catch and is fast. I'm like, yes, sir. I can catch. I'm fast. All right, you're hired. It's like Jack Kemp's team this weekend, and he has all these guys from the boiler room. So I hope he can take a hit.
That's funny.
And I learned more just being out in the field playing on a
Mm.
Sunday and then going to beers and at his home or later. But he was an amazing leader, and so was Whitehead. So and every week you're going to the White House and meeting with senators and congressmen and Supreme Court justices, members from the media. We go on an international trip, a domestic trip. We went to Asia that year. There's a military trip as well. So after that year, you leave with lifelong friends, and you just learn a ton about how government works.
Yeah, it's a really incredible vantage point to be kind of on the inside by deliberate, by intent, that's designed so that you are right on the inside there helping. I had Warren Rustin on this podcast previously, who had been a White House fellow under Nixon at the end of the Nixon administration. And then I think he was a fellow under Ford, and then Ford took over. And so he just told this crazy story about the whole transition period because that was a chaotic time in American history. And what's interesting about that story is that John Whitehead had gone from financial services into government. You, a couple years later, go from government into financial services, and you start Sterling Financial, which at one point was the number 8 fastest growing privately held company in the United States, according to Inc. magazine. What it was it was it your mentorship under Whitehead that led to your interest in financial services, or to go into that?
That really inspired me. And also, Bill Bennett had been a lawyer, so I decided to leave the military and I went to Columbia Law School. I
Hmm.
did very well, first to publish on the Law Review and things like that.
Yeah.
But
By the
what
way, I went to
happened?
law school as well after working at the White House because I looked around all these other lawyers. I'd been in meetings with them, and they would generally win arguments over me. I would lose my arguments to them. I was like, maybe I should go to law school.
Yeah, law school, um, it definitely teaches you how to think and how to write. But I did a an internship that Whitehead, when John Whitehead was at the State Department, the wall falls in Eastern Europe, and he teamed up with a friend of his on Wall Street to set up the Hungarian Enterprise Fund, the Russian Enterprise Fund, the Czech. So they were putting $500 million in a VC fund that the government was funding to spur democracy, entrepreneurship, and capitalism in those countries. So I ended up working in Hungary and between Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and John helped me with that. But then I worked at a firm called Greenberg Traurig in Miami, and we were taking savings and loans public. And these companies were coming out at 50% of book value, coming out at $10, opening up at 19. Raymond James was on the other side of the deal, and they said, "Hey, the couple of associates that were working on the deal, do you want any stock in the public offering?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I had some money and I bought 4,000 shares. I came in the next day and it popped to $19. So I'm looking and saying, wow, I made $36,000. My offer to go work there was at 72. So I made half of 1 year salary where I'd have to work 3,000 hours to get that,
Hmm.
where on an hourly basis, my executive assistant would be making more money than I would. But when I got there, the banker on the deal was looking down. I said, "Hey, dude, made a lot of money. Just be happy." And he said, Charlie, I got bad news. The partner told me that he didn't think this was kosher. He made me cancel the trade.
Ugh.
What? And on that second, I decided and I figured out that law was a business and there was a lot easier ways to make money than practicing law. And what initially happened, I saw an opportunity with what was going on in the banking sector. All these banks were going public. And if you had a savings account or an account at the bank, you were offered stock in the public offering. And it was, you're almost doubling your money when they go. So I started in law school a hedge fund called the Bank and Thrift Fund. I opened about 500 bank accounts all over the United States back in the day where you didn't
Not
have to
easy to
prove
do. Oh,
today.
so you
Yeah.
could you just call them up and open a bank account, I
No,
guess
no,
then?
no. You could get a PO box at a UPS,
Okay, got it. Okay.
and with that address, you could open the account. You can't do that today, but
Yeah.
so I had these seeds all over the place, and we had a 37% compounded annual return for 4 years. So we had a phenomenal track record, and then that led into
Wait, what were the
starting.
500 bank accounts for?
So if you had an account at a savings and loan, and they decide to go public, they
Oh,
would
you just wanted
offer,
to get in on the friends and family for all
yeah,
these different banks. I see. Okay.
well, not friends, and because they're a mutual savings bank, they would have to offer
Oh, got
their,
it. Okay. Okay.
you're like almost a shareholder and you could
Okay.
buy up to 4.9% of
Uh,
the shares.
okay.
So anytime these banks went public, we would then buy up to our maximum.
I
And then
see.
sometimes we would try to find other people who weren't buying so we could increase it. We
Okay. So
like
now there was a little thing with the savings and loans that happened at some point in this story here for those younger people who haven't heard of this. Did you get caught holding the bag at some point? Did this catch up to you?
no, that actually was a great thing for us because it allowed us to buy undervalued assets. So we got really fortunate. And then if we had banks that weren't performing or they didn't, because then the banks would go public in 2 or 3 years, they'd be acquired by somebody else. So we would start proxy battles. It's something that the law changed in 92. I graduated from law school in 94. So we were in the Wall Street Journal, we were in the Washington Post. Um, Back in the day, we were making and bringing on board of directors to make them much more professional. So that's how it really got started. But then I went from that into building a broker dealer, managing money, opening offices in Latin America. And where I saw the opportunity was in the US Hispanic market. I spoke Spanish. I grew up in Latin America. People said, you're wasting your time. Nobody, Hispanics don't have money. So I took out commercials on CNBC, also on Univision Telemundo, and in 5 or 6 years, we became the like bank of choice for Hispanics in the US and then wealthy clients in Latin America. So when I sold the company in '06, I sold the US operation and I kept my offshore operations. And I sold that to UBS in 2012. UBS took, the 2 or 3 billion assets, and with their brand and that base, they grew it to 150 billion in Latin America.
Wow. Wow.
And the guy that I hired in 2000 stayed with them until 2022. He got picked off by another big Swiss bank that was expanding, but
Now, is there a part of you that look back at that and feel like I missed out on a lot of upside potential, or do you say, you know what, I took it as far as I could, I did great, and I'm glad that it was successful after I left? Emotionally, how do you feel about that?
well, I had a amazing board of directors that convinced me I should sell the U.S. operations. There was a guy named Max Chapman who was the CEO and chairman of Kidder Peabody, sold it to GE, became the president of Nomura, vice chairman of the Amex, first American to be on the board of a Japanese company. And he basically convinced me that it was time to sell. And I'm glad I listened to him. We cleared Bear Stearns, and Bear Stearns, several years after we sold, wasn't around, which would have caused a lot of issues. Now, I'm very happy that I only sold the US operations because the other sale did so much better than the first. Um, and, they bought what I had to offer, and I didn't have the brand name to build it to that scale. They're a Swiss bank, it's UBS.
Yeah.
So they had the infrastructure and they ran it like the Swiss bank. It was not, UBS was a US company following US rules. The Latin American UBS was, if you had your money in Panama or Mexico or Chile, it was just like you had it in Switzerland.
Mm. And I want to ask you about, so in 2002, I believe it was, when you're running the company, it was the number 8 fastest growing privately held company in the US. You were named Entrepreneur of the Year by 3 different organizations. Did you ever burn out in that period of time? It sounds like massive growth. And if you didn't burn out, how did you avoid burning out with that amount of growth in that time period?
You know, I was younger, so and I could always, focus, and I had a very, very good team, and I would always take time. I'm a surfer. I grew up on the ocean, so I would take off. I would spend time surfing. We started building the international branches, which was fun, but I did burn out, and it was tough also when you're married, you have young children. And, if I had to do it again, I would have done things much differently. I did get divorced in 2006. And, a lot of that was because you're running, 24/7. You're
Yeah.
opening an office in Greece and Chile. And next thing you're opening off in Spain and the UK. And it's a heavy lift when you're the face of the company. What had happened is, the PR team initially said, look, there's Merrill Lynch, there's Goldman Sachs, there's Charles Schwab. These are brands around individuals. So if you want to have people trust to put their money in your firm, you have to be the face of the company. And you have an advantage in that you're fluent in Spanish and you can have commercials or do interviews in Spanish. But I also started writing for CNN, and I was like on Telemundo, Univision, CNN, Fox. So that was exhausting, to
Mm.
tell you the truth. But I did have a good process in place to grow and scale the business, and I hired good people. And in retrospect, companies that scale quickly, they tend to replace their entire management teams 3 times in 10 years.
Mm.
So you have to be really disciplined because the person that got you from 1 million to 5 million in revenue is not going to be the one that gets you from 5 to 100. And the one that gets you from 100 to 1 billion will be somebody else. They're different skill sets. And when you're small, you can't afford that A plus plus talent. You don't have the
Yeah.
money and you're too small.
Yeah.
Uh, so you have to keep upsizing, and it's also not fair for the people that, you keep growing and their capabilities aren't good enough.
What how did you learn during this time period where you're having to up level your own skill set? Who did you learn from? You didn't have, I imagine, a YPO or a Tiger 21 or an R360 at that time to turn to. So how did you learn these things that you need to replace your management team, those sorts of lessons?
So I did have in 2002, I got very lucky. I was introduced to YPO and to Vistage. It used to be called Tech when I joined. So I joined them both at the same time. So I had this kind of unofficial board of directors. And then I had, people like John Whitehead who made the introductions to, a guy like Max Chapman. Why would he talk to me? So I was disciplined enough to get a real board of directors and and have real accountability and transparency and listen to them. And then I had my YPO and my Vistage, which was monthly. And in Vistage, you have someone that comes once a month. I called him my business shrink. And Harvey Gelman, he has since passed, but he was a chief operating officer of a New York Times, public company. So he was a super seasoned guy. And I learned a lot in YPO and Vistage from the other members. And I got smart, really fast.
Yeah.
But I think always believing in being totally transparent. And I had shareholders and I raised money, and most of the individuals that put money into the company were very seasoned business executives that had cash flowing businesses that allowed them to make, speculative businesses or investments in a small
Yeah.
company like mine.
I want to take a little bit of a detour and ask you about you kind of went back to your roots. You'd gone to the Air Force Academy and you went back and you served as chair of the board of visitors at U.S. Air Force Academy, appointed by both Presidents Obama and Bush. You were the second longest to hold the position after Senator Barry Goldwater. I'm always a bit fascinated by people who return to their roots and what that's like for you emotionally, having been, a cadet and then rise to that level. What was that like, kind of going home again, so to speak?
Well, I get a call from Tilly Fowler. They call her the Steel Magnolia. She's a congresswoman, one of the first women on the Armed Services Committee, and she's in the Orlando area. And there's a sexual assault scandal at the Air Force Academy. They issued a report. Nobody was demoted. No one was really held accountable. She was really upset. So she formed a seven-person panel, came out with 26 recommendations and a couple of generals got demoted. And one of the problems is they have a board of visitors that is supposed to meet four times a year, but they weren't always there. Four senators, four congressmen, seven presidential appointments. And now they want it, okay, four meetings, mandatory. And also the military would kind of decide what the agenda was going to be. So she called me and said, "Hey, I want you to do this." And I said, "Well, why should I?" I said, "Well, because I'm asking." And I said, "Well, I'm busy and I retired as a captain. Shouldn't you get a general?" And she said, "Look, when you were at the Air Force Academy, you disenrolled 60 cadets in 1 year for violating the cadet honor code. There wasn't an honor scandal. You did it. That's never happened since or before." And that indicated to her that you're going to go do these things and you're not going to he said, "You're not co-opted by the system. You have nothing to gain." So I said, "Well, is the president going to back me up if I do this?" So she assured me that would happen. So I became the chairman of the board of visitors, and I had to clean up this mess at an institution that gave me a lot. And I had to, I set the agenda. It's my agenda. I
Mm-hmm.
have a four-star general sitting next to me. I have a superintendent with 3 stars, and then I have the secretary of the Air Force. I have four U.S. senators, four members of Congress.
This is
One of the members,
intimidating.
one of the members of Congress now is the governor of Colorado. Um, and I had to lead, and that's what I did. And I was there to clean up a mess, and I did. And then I found other things that need to be done. And when the
What was the
president,
hardest mess to clean up during that time period while you were there?
look, some of it was I had to go to the president 3 or 4 times just because the military was withholding data and information that I needed.
Wow.
Um, getting the senators, the congressmen, the other presidential appointments on board, understanding our authority, the new authority, because all of a sudden we had this new authority. I got lucky because the dean was appointed, a one-star general who was a classmate of mine, and she was extremely helpful. But it took a few years to get the rhythm down. And I think also, like we have a new Secretary of Defense, right? And he was a he was an officer, but having, you're a captain.
Yeah.
And people in my class at the time were colonels. Maybe there was a one-star general by then, but I don't think so. So the way that they look at you is like, if I had
Who is
stayed
this
in the
person?
military, I'd be like a
Yeah.
colonel. I'm here telling generals and the
Right.
Secretary of the Air Force what to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah.
And I have one of these personalities.
The culture is incredibly hierarchical.
Yeah, and that was the tough thing, but for whatever reason, because of the White House fellowship experience, I was not scared of. I mean,
You
Bill
weren't you
Bennett,
weren't intimidated by going to the president and reporting up the
no,
chain or going up
or
beyond the chain, I guess.
yeah. What on my first week working for Bill Bennett, he needed to get 15 Black Hawk helicopters for an ambassador in Bolivia. And the military told him they didn't have them. Well, I said, that's ridiculous. Of course they have them. So he said, well, go meet so-and-so and so-and-so. And well, that so-and so was a three-star Marine Corps general. And I walk in with a suit and I'm sitting down and I didn't stand up fast enough. And he and his entourage screaming at me like, you better know where your bread is buttered and blah, blah, blah. And a week later, Bennett got his helicopters. So
Mm.
having that experience with the military, um, I learned, and part of the reason, honestly, also that I went to law school is when I was done with my White House fellowship, I was so effective for Bill Bennett, and the military at that time really wanted nothing to do with the war on drugs. That my new assignment, I show up to Defense Intelligence Agency, and they tell me that my new assignment is I'm going to be the analyst for the Nicaraguan Navy. And I said, well, the Nicaraguans don't have a Navy. I said, exactly. So, you know, one of my mentors was General John Galvin in Panama. I worked directly for him. Now he's a four-star general, NATO Supreme Allied Commander. And he wrote a letter to Colin Powell on my behalf, but I saw the writing on the wall. So it wasn't going to work. So I left and went a different direction, went to law school.
Yeah.
But coming back to the Air Force Academy, I have a law degree. I've been a White House fellow. I've worked for presidents, multiple presidents this time. To me, the military and the Air Force Academy had a serious sexual harassment issue that needed to be corrected. And I was there not for my own glorification, but to correct it. I had a roadmap of
And I'm sure you're
do.
thinking this, the U.S. Air Force gave me so much. This is my role to help save this institution and preserve it, for future generations.
Absolutely. And one of the other things I saw, diversity, inclusion has gone the wrong way, certainly. But when I was there was 1,200 new cadets coming in with a $400,000 scholarship. And I asked, well, why is there only 28 African Americans and 22 Hispanics? It made no sense to me.
Out of how many? Out of
1,200.
Oh, 1,200, yeah.
And it was
tiny.
Because what was happening is that the Hispanic and the Black members of Congress were not making the nominations that they should, and they were going to other people. It wasn't because they didn't exist. By the time I left, we had 300, and more importantly, their combined SAT score of those 300 African American Hispanics was higher than the 900 others because I wanted to make sure that, hey, we're not in the game. All the Ivy Leagues are taking the best, brightest. You have like two people in your recruiting office. You're not doing your job. You're not spending the money. And if you did, because the military was saying they don't exist and we can't bring.
And what did you have to do? Did you have to go to the individual members of Congress that were nominating these candidates and say to them and point that out to them? And is that what
we were doing is first we had to find out what the problem was, and the military wouldn't give us the list. And I finally had to go to the president, and the reason they didn't want to give us a list is that the then Speaker of the House, which I can now say, Nancy Pelosi, was one of the ones making zero recommendations. And it wasn't because any one of them was anti-military or anything like that. The military didn't want me to get the list because they thought we would make something out of this Nancy Pelosi thing, which we never did. What we did is we took a staffer to the academy. We showed him the benefit. We also showed them that they could use the franking system, which was free. Every time they nominated somebody, photo op, it would be great. They would be giving the kids a $400,000 scholarship. And if you're a congressman in an all African American district or Hispanic, obviously,
no brainer,
people that you're going to be and once we educated the staff and showed that, look, this is not like a full-time role. You can take a staffer and it could be 25% of their duty. We solved that problem very quickly. And all the assumptions that they were making that these kids didn't exist, these people are anti-military, it was all nonsense. I did have an issue in LA, and there was a congressman who then became the attorney general, and under Biden, he was the head of HHS. He came up with a brilliant idea, and we brought special forces, Navy SEALs, Marine Recon, and he fills up a high school and full of gangs in LA. Said, "You guys think of this gang, this gang. This gang is the toughest gang, but I'm going to tell you the toughest gang in the world that I don't know if any one of you could even make it in there." And all of a sudden, like Navy SEAL comes out, highly decorated. They start showing all these video. Kids' eyes are
Mm.
opened up, and all of a sudden, all these people wanted to see, well, hell, how can I graduate from high school, get good grades, and go to one of the service academies? We just had to talk to them in a way that
Yeah, yeah.
made it seem attractive.
You mentioned right now that there's kind of a backlash against the equity and inclusion movement, if that's fair to say. We're recording this in the beginning of 2025. You've done a lot of work to help Latinos, empower Latino leaders. What are your thoughts on that? What is there a solution to the current
Yes,
kind of cultural
there
zeitgeist?
is. It went way off the skids, and it's you got to give everybody an equal opportunity, not equal outcome, and you have to treat everybody equally and give them a chance. So I liked what they've done in football and other things where, hey, there's a bias in that we tend, if we're interviewing, to select people that look like us, have the same background. But if I'm a manager and I want to look good, I want to hire the very best, the smartest, the most capable. And I don't care what color they look like, what religion they are. I just want them to be super, super competent. And I think that in today's day and age, people believe that. They don't care what your sexual preference is, they don't care what color you are. If you're working in corporate America, they just want you to be a really good team member. And people do understand that if you have diversity of thought, it's going to be more helpful because you're going to get better ideas. But the whole idea was corrupted into something that it wasn't. It went away from merit. And that's why I think it's so important that when we did this at the Air Force Academy, we were we wanted to get African Americans and Hispanics that were better
Well, as
than
you
the
said,
average.
the numbers demonstrated it because the numbers were better than the underlying numbers.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And we wanted to say, no, 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 no. These aren't like, if this person is black or brown and they're sitting next to you, they're smarter than you. You
Yeah,
know?
exactly.
And,
Right. Right.
but that's not what you saw over the last 4 years. And the president was on the live TV today over the accident with the helicopter and the plane in Washington D.C. And it really has the pendulum has swung, and like everything else, it now will swing to the other side, and maybe one day it'll be somewhere in the middle, and we'll find the
Yeah.
right balance.
Yeah. I want to get to present day, some of the projects you're working on now, or rather, let's start with the pandemic. So you had been involved in Tiger 21, you'd been involved in YPO, and at some point, you started to form this idea of creating R360, which is for ultra high net worth individuals. And I have so much respect for people that create a community because creating a community is so hard from scratch. So talk a little bit about the original origin idea, why you wanted to take on this Herculean task.
Well, it goes back to signing up for a class when I was around 50 years old. Bill George, who's an incredible leader, he took Medtronic from a billion to 60 billion on the board of Goldman, Exxon. He goes to Harvard Business School in 2002 to teach. And he writes the book, True North, Authentic Leadership. I'm like, well, I'm an authentic leader. So I went to this 5 or 6 day executive program that he was teaching. And I found out I'm not an authentic leader because I didn't know my life purpose. And I couldn't align them with my values. So I hired a coach from YPO. It took me about a year, and I can now articulate very clearly that my life purpose is to inspire and connect others to achieve extraordinary things. It takes my three God-given gifts. I like to teach, I like to coach, I like to lead. That's the inspire part. I like to write. Um, at the time, I was one of the top 20 most connected people in the world on LinkedIn. Now I'm in the top 100 since it's grown so much. I'm just a natural connector. And then whatever organization I'm in, I'm the strategy guy. What's the big, hairy, audacious goal? Who are the people that we need? What is the differentiating product? And what's the process that we're going to use to grow and scale the company? That's what I'm good at. That's so those combine into my life purpose. And at the time, I was doing like 23 different things, and I eliminated 20 of them because they didn't align with my purpose.
Hmm.
And then really understanding what your values are, which is really important, especially in a company. So Bill George says, told me, hey, Charlie, you should come to this 1 year advanced leadership class at Harvard, where you're going to learn from the best and the brightest. You can take any class that you want um, at any of the 12 colleges, which is great. You have to do the homework, but you don't have to take exams or write papers. And at the end of it, you have to present what do you want to do to change the world, to make an impact over the next 20 years. And everyone in your class, there was actually 45, and then half of them brought their spouses to be in the program as well. And I went with my spouse to Cambridge. So it was an incredible learning experience. And then I taught at MIT for 2 years how to use behavioral analytics to lead high-performing teams, which has always been a fascinating thing for me. So I'm trying to figure out what should I do next. I had been in YPO, Vistage. I'd been 8 years in Tiger 21. In Tiger 21, you needed to have a net worth of $10 million, and it's all about learning to become a better investor. And I was already a good investor when I joined Tiger 21, and I became even better learning all these different asset classes. But my belief is that wealth is much more than money. To me, wealth is not only financial capital, it's also your intellectual capital, social, human, emotional, and spiritual. And it's a combination of those, which I call the fishes because it spells fishes. And the other important thing is, and I mentioned it before, is values. And my number one value is honor, which is not only integrity, but being transparent, protecting the privacy of other members in terms of our company, excellence, relishing direct feedback and always getting better, entrepreneurial grit, just being curious, open, joy, and importantly, generosity of spirit. Now, so I decided if we could find people who had built a net worth of 100 million or more, and they had those values, and we could align them around an inspiring purpose, we could change the world. So I launched R360, and the website's R360 Global because I couldn't buy R360 from a Chinese company.
Yeah, four-letter domains. That's so hard these days.
Very hard. So our purpose is to architect an oasis for strategic wealth creators and their families to flourish. And flourishing families do certain things. They set an intention not only to build a great fortune, but a great family. They share their history and their family stories repeated through the generations. So I have an award-winning filmmaker. We do a film on each member, not for ego, but how do you talk to your great-great-grandchildren that you're never going to meet? How do you inspire them to live a purposeful life with all the blessings that you've created? Respect and encourage individual differences. I have 4 children. They're totally different. And if you treat them all the same, you're not going to maximize their full potential. And then how do you wisely allocate family capital to family members and worthy causes? And if my family is my human capital and I have a family enterprise, am I hiring a coach for them to help them professionally? Well, a really good coach costs 5 to 8,000 a month. They don't have that money, but I do.
Hmm.
So many individuals have a liquidity event, and all of a sudden they're running a family enterprise. And if you have employees and they don't perform, you get rid of them. But you're kind of stuck with your family
Yeah.
and getting your spouse or your kids, Dad, I
Yeah.
heard that. Heard that
Yeah.
one too, Dad. So
I,
it's
I got
different.
I got 4 kids as well. Right now, the youngest is 6, and I can't really picture them in running a family business right now. Maybe when they get older.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that you have to learn. And I thought if we could aggregate 1,000 superheroes around the world that had these values and aligned around this purpose, and we created a philanthropic platform, not that we're investing together, but if we have 20 individuals that want to take plastics out of the ocean, and we have a circle around that where they're working together and increasing their impact to do that. I mean, how amazing would that be? I was just on the phone yesterday with Scott Harrison, who founded Charity Water. He's brought 20 million people in the world water. He crossed the $1 billion mark that he's raised, 100 million a year. I knew him when he was a $2 million a year nonprofit. Now he's over 100. He is a rock star. So we bring people like that to help our members. Like, hey, you've had a liquidity event, John. You're worth like, our average member now is worth 500 million. We have 138 and growing quickly. And some of them are like, what do I do next? I said, dude, you're like one of the most amazing entrepreneurs. We have 14 members that didn't graduate from college. Eight of the members didn't go to high school, didn't graduate from high school. 5 of those 8 are billionaires. And their stories are just dyslexia. They got thrown out of school,
Hmm.
but they've done amazing things, and now they really want to give back, and we help them and inspire them to not only, and it's not only giving money. So I was on the Florida State Board of Education for 6 years, and the reason I did it, not only because the governor, Jeb Bush, asked me to, but 1/3 of Latino students were not graduating from high school. And by the time I left, they had the highest graduation rates in the United States, the highest percentage going to college. And if you think of the effect on the Florida economy from doing that, and Jeb Bush was just a great governor around education, and he really understood that well. I led his reading task force. A lot of the reason they were not graduating is because if you can't read at grade level by 4th grade, by 5th grade, it really picks up. And we had a really bad reading program, so we did a lot of things structurally to change it. And I would say that if I had to say, well, what's your greatest achievement? It'd be what I did there. And I gave my time. So for
Hmm.
6 years, every month, I was going to Tallahassee for a couple of days and helping. I was one of 7 members and we had, the budget at the time for Florida was 53 billion, and half of that was K-20 education. So it was a massive responsibility.
Yeah.
Florida, because of what the governor did and the board, is the only state in the United States that increases substantially on the nation's report card year to year.
Hmm.
So they have one of the best school systems in the United States.
I want to ask you about the getting R360 off the ground because oftentimes it's that initial few members, the early days is kind of the hardest. How did you get it off the ground? Was it just, people within your network and was it harder than you expected?
You know, I surrounded myself with 10 advisors that gave me advice I did not want to take, and I'm glad I did. So when I worked at a law firm when I was younger, I said the worst job in the world would be to be the managing partner of a law firm
Oh,
where you
shoot
have
me.
six,
Awful.
yeah,
Yeah.
60 or 70 big egos
Oh
and you had
yeah.
to
Uh-huh.
deal with them and how are you going to split the profits?
Mm.
So their advice was, look, YPO is a nonprofit. Vistage is a for-profit. Then you also had, these kind of in-between companies that have a social purpose. And they convinced me you should have a partnership. And what you should do is go to 40 or 50 individuals that would become founding partners and basically they would own up to 60% of the organization, but they'd write a check for $360,000. But they'd be partners and you'd have a
Interesting. So
strategy.
you're basically giving away a lot of equity in this organization in order to get their buy-in and get them to help with building a critical mass of members.
Right. But if they're
Yeah.
owning, call it, you know, 1 to 1, over a percent, you give them something so they feel I'm a
Yeah.
partner.
Yeah.
Guess what? They're going to recommend people in their
Yeah.
network. They're going to be
Yeah.
on the strategy committee. I have a comp committee.
Yeah.
I have all these different committees.
Yeah.
So they're helping to build the business. And these are serious, serious entrepreneurs. That 80% of our members are first-time entrepreneurs. Many have had $2 or $3 billion exits, and I couldn't afford to hire them certainly, but they're
Yeah.
now on your strategy committee, and
You get
they're
them bought into the mission and they're more into it. So you took that advice and how did it play out for you?
took that advice. And look, when you have 7 or 8 hard charging, very opinionated, smart entrepreneurs looking at stuff and telling you what to do, you just have to learn how to how to take feedback and how to work. And at the end of the day, it worked beautifully because now we're at 100 and I think we just let in 2 people last week, incredible humans. And I was just laughing today because we had a team meeting and there's probably like 20 members that I don't even know,
Mm.
which
Hmm.
which I guess is a good thing because
Yeah.
we're in New York, we're in the Midwest, we're in Texas, we're in California, we're Florida. We just opened Deer Valley in Utah. We have 6 or 7 members internationally. We don't even have groups there, but we are in Switzerland, London, Buenos Aires, Taiwan, Canada. Um, and I'm meeting this week with someone that wants to open Canada. We've been named the most exclusive private members club in the world by 3 organizations. 72 applicants have been denied, including 9 billionaires. I'm not on the membership committee. I've had several people that I've recommended that haven't made it through. And while it's uncomfortable when that happens, we've gotten much better in weeding out people before they go to the
And,
membership committee.
and what disqualifies a person?
What disqualifies them is one, like, hey, I want to be involved, but I don't want my spouse or kids involved. This is
Mm.
really a family thing. Unlike
Mm.
Tiger 21, we invite spouses to meeting. We had a meeting in November where I had 6 children.
Mm.
I say, well, I had
It changes the dynamics.
4 adults and 2 16-year-olds, but it was very, very cool. So it's a family experience. Other is not alignment around the values. They want to use the organization to sell products and services or get some benefit from their company. We
Yeah.
have an honor committee. We have a member who was a prosecutor, tried 45 cases. Um, there is no solicitation. We never, in Tiger 21, every meeting, they're presenting an investment product. We don't do that. Our members, they're so wealthy, they don't care. 80% of them outsource their wealth to professionals. They're there for family, for legacy, um, for other things, and also really believing that wealth is more than money. And you're going to lead. What happens at our meetings, which is very different than anywhere I've been, is when you're at an intellectual capital meeting, at the end of it, you have to tell the group between now and the next intellectual capital meeting, this is what I want to be held accountable for myself, my spouse, my children, because I'm the patriarch or matriarch. And then I reach out to you. Do you need any help with any of those? And when you come to the meeting in a year, it'll say, hey, John, you said you want to do these 6 things. Did you get them done? And you don't want to be like, oh, no, I didn't get them done. So the idea is that you are growing around these 6 forms of capital and you are increasing your game. So, I made a comment like 2.5 years ago in the human capital meeting that I wanted to write a novel. And guess what? They hold you accountable. And
Yeah, it's on in the works. We were talking about it before. Yeah.
right now, and they like about a year ago, I said I was going to learn to play the electric guitar and all this stuff, and I have the electric guitar on my wall, but I'm not there yet because I'm so busy with everything else. So that holding each other accountable and then helping others, like, hey, you've never done a family meeting before. Well, great. We have all kinds of resources to help you do that. So
And
the
I'll just
idea,
point to your website, which has some great resources on talking with your family, talking with your kids about money. I grew up in a family that barely talked about money at all, very different from my wife's upbringing. And so I think that those are some great resources for people.
yeah, we didn't talk about it either. I mean, it's just one of those things. And I've learned because we're very interactive at meetings. It's not people aren't talking to you, we're talking to each other and we're sharing. And I've learned things of what do you do with kids from 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20. And, I'm like, I'm gonna have to wait and do that with my grandkids because, my youngest just turned, 22.
Yeah.
But had I done that, they'd be very different today. But I just didn't know. I mean, so
Yeah.
we
You learn
really
these things.
learn
Yeah.
these things from each other.
And how does it feel for you now? 5 years ago, you said that you took this course where you figured out you weren't using your superpowers, you weren't utilizing them, coaching, leading, writing, you're a connector, doing strategy. How does it feel for you now, 5 years later, having built this organization? Do you feel like you are operating in your superpower now?
Knowing what your life purpose is super, it is so empowering to really know why you're here. They said the most important days in your life, like when you were born and when you figure out why. So I know my why, and I just, I'm in YPO and I just finished my retreat. And what we do each year is we create a new painted picture. So I have a painted picture, which means I know where I want to be December 31, 2027, where I want to be professionally and personally. I review that. I also have a eulogy. And my eulogy is how did I make people feel and what impact did I have? It's not about accomplishments. No one's going to remember that. And that's very family centric and very impact. So I focus on that and I spend a lot of time manifesting and meditating and I have my own practice where I think if you can really visualize it and all of R360 I visualized, 3 or 4 years ago,
Mm.
back when I was in Cambridge, and I would do these exercises where I would bring the five senses into it and I could see it. And that's so important because your subconscious mind, while you're sleeping, while you're walking,
Yeah.
taking you into the direction. And if you can't see it, can't feel it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah. And I know I've had Cameron Harold on this podcast. He's a book called Vivid Vision, or similar to the
Yeah.
painted picture idea. Brian
Well,
Scudamore.
it's his.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
his.
yeah. I know others have used similar terms for it, but it's same general idea, right? Is to really vividly put together a vision of where you're driving towards, so that you can go in that direction.
Well, yeah, and it's more than that because here you want to look at it often. You also need a system, and I wish the entrepreneurial operating system traction, Gino Wickman,
Hmm.
was out when I started
Got it
a
behind
long
me
time
here. Yeah.
ago.
Yep. Yep.
But I've used that in 5 organizations and 3 nonprofits. Um, and if you do not have and use those 20 tools, which really can articulate and have a disciplined process to grow and scale and hire and using behavioral analytics to bring the right people with the right behavioral DNA for the seat. Um, it's hard to be successful, but these tools exist now and they work.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
do work.
Yeah, I've had Gino Wickman on the podcast and a bunch of other EOS experts on there, and it is a fascinating tool. Anytime I meet a successful entrepreneur who tells me, "Oh, I have 5 companies," I'm like, "Do you run on EOS?" And they're like, "Well, how'd you know?" I'm like, it just happens to be, it just always is the case." Charlie, this has been a great conversation. We'll wrap up in a moment, but any further thoughts? What are you most excited about as far as R360 is concerned, going into 2025 right now?
I think the people are coming to us. We had our January. It's typically not been a great month for us, but what's happened is we've had 5 new people clear the membership committee. This year we're starting with renewals. Unlike some organizations that are 1 year memberships, our memberships are 3 year memberships, and those renewals are coming in really strong. So I'm really excited about that. Um, I'm meeting this week with someone that wants to open up Canada. Our strategy committee doesn't want us to touch international until we get to 200 to 250 members, but I think we will get there within the next year to 18 months. But what I'm most excited about is the incredible impact that the members are having, and they get inspired when you're in a room and you have dreams of what you want to do, um, and really see, wow, I can do that too. And we have members also that could have $1 billion plus exit, but they're thinking, oh my gosh, I just can't imagine what I'm going to do if I sell this company in 6 months. I'll be so bored. Who the heck knows what'll happen? And I'm going to regret it. But
Mm.
then they meet people that are say, you know what? I'm 10 times more busy today, having fun, making an impact, doing venture philanthropy, doing this, doing that. And I don't have all the stress. And I'm spending all this time with my family, coaching them, my grandkids. Um, it's a whole, I have 3 members now that are on this boat called the World that goes around the world.
Uh,
And
is it a
the,
cruise ship that goes around?
It's a
Okay, yeah.
cruise ship. You
Yeah.
actually buy one, and they vote every year on where they're going to go. It spends 10 months on the water, so they'll miss the meeting, but they'll zoom in from who the heck knows
Wow.
where they are, but they're having fun. Um, so I
Cool.
think that, and I'm about to have a granddaughter on February 11th, so I'm very excited
Congratulations.
about
Congratulations.
that.
That is very
It's nice
exciting. That's
when
very
when
exciting. Well, this has been great. One more question before I get to my last question. You have a picture with Richard Branson, Sir Richard Branson, on your website. Maybe you did an R360 event there or something else there. I'm always a bit fascinated by him as this iconic entrepreneur. Any thoughts or observations or anything that you've learned from any experiences with him?
Richard is kind of the founding father of R360, and a lot of the idea initiated actually with him. After the pandemic, R360 was the first group that he invited to the island. I've done 9 events now with him on Necker and one in South Africa with him. Look, he's authentic, he's real, he's fit and in shape. He's the real deal. He lives his life with purpose, with passion. I I I mean, I was there when he was selling a massive one of his companies. He wasn't surrounded by investment bankers. He'll still spend 4 hours a day bicycling, playing tennis, working out, and he's not afraid to say it like it is. He was born, dyslexic. He's had that challenge, but he is just a joy to be around. And I just love his curiosity. He's like a child in terms of his curiosity, but he is one of the most curious people I've ever been around,
Mm.
and also one of the most competitive humans
Oh
I
yeah.
have been with. And
Did
the
you
other
play
thing
him at
about
tennis?
him, I'm not a good tennis player, so he has no, but I have a partner that was, and he couldn't beat. So he would invite at 6 in the morning to play until, or chess. Like
Yeah.
a friend of mine was beating him in chess. So he invited him to his house, like he couldn't let him off the island until he beat him. But his curiosity, his competitiveness, and then the other thing, which is counterintuitive, you think he's an extrovert and this, he's a little shy, actually,
Hmm.
which you wouldn't think, but he's such a kind, gracious human being, and I'm very happy to, call him, not a friend, but an acquaintance. Where
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
saw him, he knew who I was, but he's become very good friends with some of our members who can keep up with him cycling in all parts of the world.
Hmm.
Uh, and but a lot of the reason that R360 was founded in the first place was really because of his vision of what somebody should do with their wealth for the benefit of humanity and to heal our planet.
Yeah, really amazing, amazing guy. All right, I want to wrap up, and actually, that was a perfect transition to my final question, which is: I'm a big fan of gratitude, practicing gratitude, especially acknowledging other people in your network who've helped you in your journey along the way. So you've mentioned a bunch of names so far, Sir Richard Branson being one of them. Anyone in particular that you would want to shout out and just thank for helping you in your journey, in your story?
Sure. And we had our team meeting today, and we always end with gratitude, where everybody in the team goes around and points out people. But I'd say Max Chapman, who I mentioned briefly, he was the chairman of Sterling Financial, and he did something amazing for me. He said, "Look, part of my role is to find a successor. You've been really working hard. You're a little burnt out. I want you to take a 2-week vacation. But before you leave, in case something happens, you get hit by the proverbial bus, help me find the perfect person to replace you. Something happens to you." And I did that. And when I came back, he said, "Hey, Charlie, you left this for me, and I want you to be honest with me and yourself. Take a look at it and tell me if you're that person. If you are, great. But if you're not, then you should come on the board with me and we should find that person, or we should sell the company."
Mm, wow.
And
Wow.
I had to be honest. I said that wasn't me, and I ended
Mm,
up selling the company. And I credit him for number one. He's a super busy, wealthy guy, and he took the time to join the board of a little rinky-dink Yeah, we were fast growing, but we weren't a billion-dollar, behemoth. We had billions in assets under management, but having a guy like that on the board was so incredible. And he was a U.S. Marine, 10% body fat. He was just tough
And
guy, but he knew how to
and
give
you
advice,
see, you
you know?
said earlier that you are fascinated with how to use behavioral analytics to lead teams. What a fascinating way that Max handled that conversation in a respectful way that allowed you to be vulnerable enough to acknowledge that you weren't the person that you had written down on paper.
Yeah, no, I look. And he said, look, if that's you, then great, then run the company. But if it's
Yeah.
not, and look, I had shareholders, and it's a tough. The business changed tremendously from we used to make markets. You used to have these wide spreads. You could make money, and then all of a sudden it became decimals, and the whole business radically changed from 2000 to 2003.
Mm.
And all these markets that we were in, we had to pivot. We couldn't compete. All these new rules and regulations came out. So I thank him, and I'm grateful for all the great advice that I got from him, and the fact that he took the time to be on a board of a regulated company and really guide us
Yeah.
with wisdom was great.
Charlie, this has been great. R360 and r360global.com is the website. Anywhere else that you would direct people to go check out and learn more about you?
No, I think that's it. And my last, recommendation is my favorite business book is Think and Grow Rich. But
Napoleon Hill, yeah.
to get the actual first book, which before it got reduced, is Laws of Success, which is about 1,200 pages. And if you really want to learn from the best, that is a great book if you want to be an entrepreneur.
1,200 pages. I read it at one point, but I don't think it was 1,200 pages. I hope they have that on Audible and I can do it on 2x speed.
Well, what happened is Clement Stone came in and said, no one's going to read a 1,200-page book, and Laws of Success is boring. So they put it into 220 words, and they called it Think and Grow Rich. But in compressing it down, it lost a ton. I have it behind me, and many times I'll read a chapter or two. But the first 106 pages of the book,
just acknowledgments.
The big one, no. It's all about the importance of a mastermind.
Yeah.
You said you're an EO, and I've been in YPO, and the value of having a mastermind. Elon Musk has one. Benjamin Franklin had one in his day. Surrounding yourself with a dozen super smart people and being vulnerable. They're not on your real board. They can call you out on your BS. And hold you accountable. Really
super valuable. Yeah. Charlie, this has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.